Hello, welcome once again to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. Talking about tonight's 10-game slate at DraftKings, of course. And if you saw the pitcher nail down we did earlier, obviously you know this is not a pretty night for pitching. But because of that, quite a few high totals. So definitely some hitters you want to get. Make sure you pay for some hitters tonight. You're going to need them. It's probably going to be a pretty high-scoring night as far as hitters go and offenses. Because Vegas has, I think, 5 or 6 games with at least 8.5 run total.
Yep.
So definitely going to be a high scoring night. We'll start off the pitcher here. We'll start off talking about Matt Harvey, who is very expensive, $11,100. He's a guy you got to pay a premium for, but he hasn't been putting out a premium product for that price. So that's not to say he's a bad play against that depleted Washington offense. That's pretty much Bryce Harper and everyone else. But at the same time, over $11,000, hasn't been showing big strikeout numbers recently. Hasn't even been pitching really deep in the game. He's been pretty much 7 innings, 6 to 7 innings most starts, and that's not a guy I'm willing to pay over $11,000 for in my cash games. So for me, I think he's a top-notch GPP option against that lineup, but not a guy that I'm going to force into my cash games with so many hitters I want to pay for tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he's a really good GPP play as a cash game play. Just because there's no other cash game plays on the board, I don't mind him. I mean, if you can come up with a hitting team around like Matt Harvey and Gio Gonzalez, I think that's a fine play in cash games today just because of the volatility of the rest of the pitchers out there. I think you're going to get an okay line from Harvey either way. Maybe not a great one. Most likely not one that's worth 11-1. But comparatively to some of these other pitchers out there, I think you can get a pretty solid cash game line from him unless you really like somebody else out there besides him and Gio Gonzalez, who we can move to right now. I think Gonzalez is another guy that, I mean, at 8,100 on DraftKings, I feel pretty good about it. There's not a whole lot of risk there. He's not a big strikeout guy anymore. The Mets haven't been striking out a ton. He's not a huge favorite because, like you mentioned, Washington's offense isn't great. They're facing Harvey. I don't mind playing them against each other today because of the lack of other options out there, but it's really hard to feel good about it. I would only do that in cash games. Obviously, GPPs, you want to do your best to try and get 2 wins in there if you can. But I think those two are my top 2 plays by quite a bit, and I don't even feel that great about those 2 guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's the state of tonight's slate, definitely. Gio Gonzalez, even he prone to implosion at times, ground ball pitcher, but like you said, not a high strikeout floor. Just not a lot to love about him either, but definitely that price, though, $3,000 less than Harvey, probably dollar for dollar, my favorite option on DraftKings tonight. Another guy slightly more expensive than him, Andrew Heaney, $8,400. We talked about him on the Pitcher podcast. I mean, the guy's been great. 3 total earned runs in his last 3 games. Some tough matchups as well at Colorado versus the Yankees. Tonight gets a Boston team that's bottom 10 in Team WOBA and WRC+. Plus. Also playing a doubleheader, so maybe we see guys like Ortiz, maybe we see some other people sit out, as we were talking about on the other podcast. Yep. But either way, I think with that price considered and as well as he's pitched, he's just instantly one of your better options tonight, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, he's got good stuff. He was a pretty top prospect. Another guy, Matt Moore, on this slate is very similar to that. They've been dealing with injuries, and we know they've been able to pitch in the past. They've had good stuff. So, I mean, there's some upside with guys like that rather than running out someone like Ian Kennedy that we know is on the tail end of his career or something like that. I prefer to run out these younger guys that we really don't have as much data on them, especially for GPPs. I just don't see a ton of upside with running Ian Kennedy out there against San Francisco. I mean, that's more of a cash game play. He's 6,600, so that's a decent one. I mean, Tim Hudson is another guy like that just has not been good this season. He's down to 5,600 now. But, I mean, even for him, most of the time he's not paying off that price tag. He's been injured for, I want to say, 2.5 weeks now? He's been out or so. I think since the end of June.
Yep.
But even prior to that, I mean, he was going 5-6 innings every start, giving up 3 to 5 earned runs for the most part. He just wasn't a great option, even against San Diego. I don't feel great about it, especially coming off that injury. 5,600, there's not a ton of risk there. Guy you can maneuver around in your lineup a little bit if you want. Quite a few other guys like that. Ruby De La Rosa, we talked about on the pitching podcast, faces a pretty weak Miami lineup that doesn't have a lot of scary lefties in it. Yelich is really the only one. I'm going to stick to the top at pitcher today if I can. Otherwise, I'm going to go all the way down near the bottom with someone like Hudson, maybe Alfredo Simon against Seattle, who haven't been a great hitting team, but Simon hasn't been great either. There's just not a lot to love at pitcher.
No, not at all. I think for the most part it's going to be Gio and Heaney for me in cash games, just because they're cheap enough. You can still get a lot of hitters in there, but you also get yourself a decent floor because both guys pretty solid tonight. All right, moving on here to catcher options. This is going to be a fun one tonight, especially with the game in Coors Field. I really like Robinson Trinos, always against a lefty. Now he's in Coors Field against a lefty. He's probably going to have a terrible lineup spot, batting 7th, 8th, or 9th maybe. But, he probably won't be batting 9th tonight, being in an NL park. But 3,900 is pretty pricey for him. He's probably more of a GPP play for me. I think a guy that's going to be really fun finally got a catcher eligibility, Kyle Schwarber, $3,400 against Michael Lorenzen. I think he's in a fine spot tonight. Outside of that, you just don't love a whole lot of catcher. You probably, for me, I want to get a piece of Coors Field where I can, so it's probably going to be Trinos if I'm going to get that spot, because Hundley and Michael McHenry, it'll probably be Hundley in tonight. I don't feel great about either guy. McHenry's only $2,900 if he's in. I think he's a fine way to save some money, but nobody that really jumps off the page to me at catcher.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'm probably playing Hundley as much as I possibly can, assuming he's in the lineup. I don't mind your Chirinos play. That's a pretty solid one, too. Outside of that, I don't love Buster Posey today. He's a fine play against Kennedy, but for 4,000 on DraftKings, I don't feel absolutely great about it. One guy that's interesting to me is Kyle Schwarber for the Cubs. Lefty facing a righty in Lorenzen today at Cincinnati. Big power park, especially for lefties. I think he's going to be an interesting GPP play for me today.
Yeah, and Lorenzen allowing a 431 WOBA to lefties, so definitely a beatable spot. I don't really see much need to dig deep here at catcher. Like we said, probably stick with the Coors Field guys or maybe Schwarber, and that's about it for me tonight.
I don't mind Jaso as a cash game play either. He's a little pricey, but for a catcher hitting first in the order and a lefty facing a righty in Buchanan, I think that's a fine play.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely, and also another AL team moving to the NL, so monitor and make sure that these guys are in the lineup, because I know Jaso DH'd a couple times. Maybe he sits out.
That's a good point.
All right, first base options. I really like Anthony Rizzo, another lefty against Lorenzen at 5,100 if I'm paying up. You got Fielder and Moreland both in Coors Field. Neither one great against left-handed pitching, so obviously you prefer Fielder to Moreland there if you're going to pay for one of them, but I probably won't be. A guy that I really like and is just crazy cheap still, Ben Paulson, $3,200. Going to be cheap Coors Field exposure for you. I think he's probably going to be my cash game play there. He just makes a lot of sense there at that price range. Really just no one else that's even in a really good spot there. Victor Martinez, though, at $3,800, crushing lefties as he always does. Gets J.A. Happ tonight at home. I think he's still just criminally underpriced. So if you're not getting Coors Field here at first base, I think Martinez is the guy I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think so too. One other guy I'll mention is Ryan Rua for Texas, if he's in the lineup. He's been playing quite a bit against lefties lately at Colorado, 3,100, plays first base and outfield. You could really go 3 first basemen on DraftKings today with Rua, Paulson, and then if you want to go with another first baseman, maybe spend up on Rizzo in Cincinnati, I think is a solid play if you're looking to spend up. Todd Frazier with Clayton Richard on the mound. I'm sure we'll get to him at third base, but because I think he's the top third base play. He's a fine first base play also at 4,900 against a lefty at home. I think he's got like a 1,100 OPS against a lefty at home this year. So he's probably my top third base play, and he's probably a top 3 or top 5 first base play also.
Yeah, completely agree there. Crushes lefties, like you said, especially at home. Second base options, Rougned Odor is the guy that I've been playing quite a bit against righties, but he gets a lefty today. Not so great against lefties, so at 4,600, he's more of a tournament play for me. DJ LeMahieu, another one of those guys, not a lot of upside, but should be a good cash game play tonight at 4,100 with a team that has a 5.5 run total. Once again, picking on Clayton Richard, Brandon Phillips at 3,800, probably going to be leading off. Richard, as we know, is just terrible so far this season. I can't imagine that changing tonight in Great American Ballpark. And outside of that, if you're going to go cheap, I probably going to go with a guy like Johnny Giavotella, $3,000. He's going to be leading off against Stephen Wright, or should be leading off. It's a doubleheader, so keep your eye on that. But as far as cheap guys, he's one of my favorites probably as far as cheap guys, because he's got Trout, Pujols, Calhoun, all those big bats behind him.
Yeah, definitely. Joe Panic is probably my favorite cash game play at second base, only 3,500, facing a righty in Kennedy. He's been rock solid all year. He's going to be, I would think, probably in most of my lineups today. One last guy, second base shortstop, Cesar Hernandez against a lefty and more, I think is a fine play. Hitting second in the order at only 2,600. I'm going to have him in a ton of lineups also with having both middle infield eligibilities.
Yeah, great call there. I like that cheap tag. Third base, like you mentioned, Todd Frazier, we kind of already touched on him. He's 4,900. He's in a great spot. If you're not going with him, the popular plays on the night are going to be Nolan Arenado at 5,500 against Nick Martinez, who is terrible, even worse against righties, now at Coors Field. So going to be a very high-owned player, I would imagine. $1,200 discount there to Adrian Beltre, facing a lefty in Coors Field. We know the story with him. Hasn't been great this season, but throughout his career, absolutely crushed left-handed pitching. So you got to like the spot for him at Coors Field as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's a really strong play tonight. Kyle Seager is a guy I'll probably throw out there a little bit at 3,700 if I'm not pitching Simon. Saw a bunch of people talking about Jake Lamb against Phelps today. I don't like playing Jake Lamb. He just doesn't have the upside for me. He's 3,600. It just doesn't seem worth it to me. Maikel Franco is an interesting guy against a lefty and more. He's been hitting third against lefties for Philly. 4,000 is a pretty decent price for him. Not too much else I really like today at third.
No, me either. I think it's going to be, almost everyone's going to be on those top three guys that we mentioned. So probably your best bet to go ahead and get exposure to those guys because those are by far the top options. They're going to be getting all expect to have big games. You're going to be setting yourself behind pretty quickly if those guys all have big games. And I'm with you on Jake Lamb. Just not a guy I'm a fan of playing. I'm not a Jake Lamb fan at all.
Yeah.
Shortstop tonight, Troy Tulowitzki gets a bad pitcher in Coors Field. It's not a lefty, but doesn't really matter. $5,200. He will be in all of my lineups if I can afford him. He's expensive, but he should be worth it all tonight. If you're not playing Andrew Heaney, Hanley Ramirez, if he's in the lineup for the second half, does get a lefty at $4,000. I think he's an okay swerve if you're just trying to be different in GPP, but I can't really imagine not having Troy Tulowitzki in my cash games tonight.
Yeah, he's far and away the top play. I think it's really not even that close. I'll look at Hanley Ramirez a little bit probably against Haney just because it's a lefty. And he has shortstop eligibility on DraftKings. 1,200 discount from Tulowitzki. I think he'll be a decent GPP play just because of how heavily Tulo's owned. Outside of that, maybe Brandon Crawford at 3,500 against Kennedy. Not too much else I'm too excited about today.
No, there's a couple other options I don't mind. Eugenio Suarez has hit the ball pretty well, 3,300 against Clayton Richard if you're picking on him still. If Brad Miller's leading off, 3,100. We know Alfredo Simon, almost a 400 left WOBA to lefties. He's really struggled with them. Outside of that, like I said, I want Troy Tulowitzki. The other guys are just options if you're going to GPP to try to be different. But for me, it's Tulowitzki all day.
Yeah, the only other guy I'd use in a cash game probably is Hernandez, who you mentioned at second base, and that's just because he's 2,600 against a lefty. So,
yeah, if that gets you one more big bat or one better pitcher, then I don't mind going that way. Outfield options, love Charlie Blackmon, $5,300 against Nick Martinez. We know this guy can do it all. He steals bases. He hits home runs. Loves hitting at home. Probably going to be a really popular option. I prefer him over Carlos Gonzalez in cash games because I think he has a higher floor. Other guys to consider, Bryce Harper 0 for 12 with 6 Ks against Matt Harvey. So not a guy I'm probably trying to pay 6K for when there's a game with an 11-run total in Coors Field. Other options in the outfield, Delano DeShields is an interesting one. More of a tournament option, of course, because he's almost $5,000. He's $4,700. But if he's leading off here against a lefty, we know the kind of speed he has. Hits one in the gap, can pay off that salary pretty quickly. But definitely a GPP option.
Yeah. Jock Peterson I like as a GPP option at 3,800 against a righty. Obviously, Charlie Blackmon's a top play at 5,300 against Martinez. I mentioned Ryan Rua as a value option at first base. I like him even more in the outfield. As far as other value guys I'm looking at go, two pretty cheap top of the order guys. Ichiro is only 2,100 against a righty in De La Rosa. He's been leading off for Miami against righties. Grady Sizemore's hitting second against righties. He faces Buchanan today. He's only 2,000 flat. Both pretty solid cheap plays. I mentioned Kyle Schwarber at catcher. He's also an outfield eligible guy. I prefer him at catcher quite a bit, but I think he's a fine value at 3,400 in this matchup. You mentioned Ben Paulson at first base also. Not a ton of top guys I like in the outfield today, though. That's the tough part for me, is that's not where I'm really wanting to spend my money, which is one of the reasons you and I assume, are both focused on Tulo at shortstop.
Yep.
There's just a lot more value in the outfield today. Obviously, Bryce Harper's always a solid play when he's facing a righty. It's Harvey, but I think he's a fine play. Rajai Davis is a guy I'll look at against a lefty and a half. He's 3,500 today. We mentioned Hanley Ramirez at shortstop. I don't hate him at 4,000 in the outfield against the lefty either.
Yeah, and a couple other options here. You got Marlon Byrd crushes lefties, another guy against Clayton Richard. We kind of touched on Christian Yelich for a minute as the only guy you really worry about with De La Rosa. $3,800 is a fine price for him as well. Josh Hamilton at 4,300 is a nice tournament play at Coors Field. It's a lefty-lefty matchup, but he's hit lefties fairly well throughout his career, so I don't mind going that route in a GPP either. Outside of that, just not a whole lot to like in that middle. Oh, Carlos Gonzalez is only 4,100, so definitely
that's
trying
a good one.
Chase some power there. He's certainly a good in a great spot. But outside of that, I think we pretty much covered guys at the top, middle, and bottom. No one else that really just jumps out. Brandon Barnes, I will say, 2,800. He'll probably be batting 8th if he's in the lineup, but that's cheap Coors exposure for you there.
Yeah, I mean, a couple other guys we can. Suspades is a fine play against a lefty and a half. I think he's okay in that higher middle range. Cole Calhoun, also, both those guys are 4,300. Cole Calhoun against a righty and right for Boston is a decent play. I mean, there's some guys in this 4,000 range. The problem is I like Rua and Paulson quite a bit at 3,100 as outfielders. Yep. So I'm going to be looking quite a bit at them, and then maybe spending up on one of these other guys.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.